Well, you know what? Let's just make it all part of it. I'll just open it up and then
Yeah.
boom, we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah.
So here comes the fun part. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Wandering Home podcast, where we have awesome guests that tell us about the evolution of their faith through kind of their life experiences. Today's a super special episode. But before we get there, because I think Kevin, you can, get into the conversation with Derek. I just want to say thanks for coming back. If you've come back, if this is your first time here, if you can, grab the visitor's card on the side of the pew, just go ahead and sign that and let us know how to get a hold of you, and we'll send you a card or something like that. So there's some Methodist humor to get us going. I have a little bit of a raspy voice today, so that what I think is really awesome about the conversation is you guys could really carry it maybe without me. So of course I'm here with Kevin. I hope it sounds like I'm really excited to be with you. Derek, Derek, I was talking to Kevin before this. We were kind of like doing a walkthrough, and I was like, I'm Tyler, this is Kevin. I try and sound really excited about you, but it's like, when your little brother, like, who's also your roommate, walks into the kitchen in the morning, it's not like, yo, I'm so happy.
Did you have a late night?
I had a long week.
Were you up watching sports?
Oh, I've been up working my real job in Charleston, South Carolina all week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so but I have been sick and coffee and all that all week, and I've been trying to escape it, and I haven't.
You're doing great. You sound great. You sound cool.
Nice.
Yeah, he does. He's got that raspy voice.
Yeah, I like it.
It's kind of sexy, man.
I like it.
Good for you.
Yeah. Well, do you want me to go put my dress on?
No,
okay.
Not yet.
All right. So let me just talk to you directly, really quickly, Derek, before I kind of give it up. So, Kevin and I, we've known each other for 7 or 8 years. We're, I think we could say best buds. When he asked me to do the podcast, I thought that it was just a really cool idea, right? Like getting into maybe the events that happen behind faith. And I think what's cool is everybody's got a story about faith. I'm not saying religion or Christianity or this or that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really neat to like have a platform where people can just tell it, because anybody can talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All that being said, I've been doing a bunch of research, like listening to podcasts that you've been on, and actually really liked you had a quick Q&A podcast on your YouTube channel a while ago. I thought those were super cool. I got into your music, but Kevin really, really, I can remember since 2017, him talking about your music. And that's why I think I think you guys can carry this thing without me. That being said, my intention here today is to be more of a fly on the wall and be the person who, maybe just asks you to unpack where maybe others in the audience would.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that's all I'm really trying to do. So it might not be that much about me. So
cool.
So I'm going to lay off like right now. Boom. Kevin, if you have anything you want to say, Derek, if you have anything you want to say, and then I think we go meat and potatoes after that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, 100%. Sounds good.
So, man, I'm super stoked that you're with us. Obviously your music has been a huge influence on me. Younger, when I was, I graduated in 2003, so Caedmon's Call was really in the heyday, and then your solo career.
Cool.
So, extremely excited.
Cool. Thank you.
One thing, I guess, kind of starting out. Where are you from, man? I think kind of western part of Tennessee. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in Memphis,
and
I was there till I was like 13, maybe.
Okay.
And then my dad's job moved us to Texas, so I was in Houston from 13 to like mid 20s.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. And now in Nashville. So mid 20s moved back to Tennessee. So I've been in Nashville for 20 something years.
I got you. Yeah. So I'm from a little town called Hamilton. It's just south of Memphis, probably about an hour and a half away on the other side of Tupelo.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, man. That's a unique city. Pretty rough city. I mean, were you kind of on the outskirts of it, or
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I grew up very suburban, and like we lived mostly we lived in when I was older and had more of a memory of it, we lived in like Germantown.
Yeah.
And I came up basically spending like almost all my time at Christ United Methodist Church over on Poplar. That's like our
Mhm.
family. That was like where we went to church, and that's where I went to school through the 6th grade, and that's where I was like super involved, or we were super involved over there, and so I spent a ton of my time over on that side of town.
Okay.
And
Cool.
but it's like when you don't drive in a city, you don't really know your way around. You don't really know where stuff is. And Memphis was all pre-driving for me, so even when I
Yeah.
go back there, I can't really find my way back to anything. I don't
Yeah.
really know where anything is.
It's a cool city though. Bill Street's awesome.
It is. It is. It's a very diverse city, but I will have to say that like I didn't. My parents both grew up in cities, and I think that's kind of the every other generational pivot is like they were probably trying to pull us into the suburbs because they grew up in cities,
Mm.
and I think there's a lot of parents my age who are pulling their kids back into cities, at least in
Yeah.
Nashville. That's like a thing. And
Oh yeah.
I mean, it swings back and forth. So most of my experience growing up was very suburban,
Okay.
in Memphis. Yeah.
And then you moved to Texas. What part of Texas?
So we were in Houston, and we were in a suburb actually of Houston, even about 40 minutes north, I think, of Houston, in Spring, Texas. And so it was like, and that's where I went to high school, or went to like junior high and high school. And then I was in Houston through like my mid 20s ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
kind of where
no, I'm going to stop us for a second,
okay.
and we're going to back it up really quickly. So I want to talk about. So have you ever been back to the Methodist Church? Like, did
Sure.
you leave at some point? What I'm trying to get to here is like, okay, so my wife is a preacher's kid. Both of them Methodist Reverend
Yep.
career. Okay, so
Yeah.
her memory of church is it was like scripted out for her by her parents, yada yada. But and we both grew up Southern Baptist. So when
I
I
gotcha.
went to the Methodist church, I was like, this is like church light. This is pretty cool for me. I kind of dig this. But I'm really sort of curious, like, what was your relationship with the church? I guess starting back in Memphis, Texas.
So you're saying that you felt like the UMC was kind of church light compared to Southern Baptist?
Yeah, I did.
That's interesting.
It was
My experience of it was
Okay.
yeah. Well, no, my experience was almost kind of the opposite because the United Methodist Church where I was in Memphis was very formal, very high church. It was very like robes and collars and pipe organs, and it was like very. It was a little more high church formal.
Yeah.
And then and I kind of had the opposite experience because then when I moved to while I was in Houston, the band Caedmon's called the band I was in before when I first got started, and I guess I'm still in apparently as it turns out. So we were very much connected to the Southern Baptist denomination because Cliff Young, who is my bandmate, his dad, he was kind of our band leader. He was like he's the other singer in the band, and his dad was the pastor of a huge Southern Baptist church in Houston, Second Baptist. And so that's kind of where we hung out. And that was kind of our home base was Second Baptist in Houston. And that to me felt, and I loved it. I mean, I loved those people. But that felt very much more contemporary to me compared to what I'd grown up in the United Methodist Church. It felt much, I mean, maybe contemporary is there was still the choir, but it was like suits and casual wear. It wasn't, and I mean, those are, I'm not trying to judge the whole thing on the attire, but it just felt a lot less. There weren't like responsive readings, and it felt like much less liturgical, and it felt like, but my experience with the United Methodist Church growing up was good. It was, my parents were not, so my mom kind of grew up Baptist, and my dad grew up Catholic, and neither very serious about it. And so they wound up raising us, my brother and I, kind of, they thought that United Methodist felt like a compromise between the two. And so it's kind of midway between Baptist and Catholic. And so, but, so they always gravitated to the Methodists, and but they weren't that serious about it. I think it just felt like a good place for us to be, to kind of keep us out of trouble or whatever. That felt like the responsible move. And so, but I did go through like confirmations when I was 13. You do the classes, and then you go up in front of the church and you're like officially a member and all that sort of thing. So I, the youth group and the deal, I did all that. Mm-hmm. But I got to tell you, I mean, it to me, it wasn't, if I'm telling a conventional faith type story, I would say that I didn't have any kind of what I would have considered a conversion experience until the middle of high school, many years later when I was in Houston.
And that's
so
in Houston. Okay.
That was in the Baptist context, I guess. So how did you?
It was
How did you get to the Baptist context? Like your parents, were they going?
Well, so that
church, or did you get invited like by or something?
Yeah. Well, that was really all centered around our band, because like when we moved to Houston, I remember us going to some church, and it was we found like a Methodist church in Houston or something, but we didn't. It was much less so when we were in Houston than in Memphis. And so really my faith experience in high school was actually not centered around a denomination. It was around a high school parachurch organization called Young Life. Yeah. And so that was more that's a whole different type of experience. But that's where it kind of picked up. That's where the thread picked up when I was in high school. But in terms of the Southern Baptist, that was all because of Caedmon's. So, because Cliff's dad, I mean, because when I connected with those people and we were starting our band, that would have been like early 90s, 92, 93. I just, as soon as I met them and as soon as we started the band, we were together 24/7, and they were always at Second Baptist in Houston, just because that's like where his dad was the pastor. And it's a mega church. So like for instance, they had a recording studio. And so our band was and in the early 90s, even in kind of the lore of how our band started, it's very like Malcolm Gladwellian, because like it was unheard of that an independent band or a non-signed professional band or whatever could record music in the early 90s. That was unheard of because it was cost prohibitive, for instance, to get into recording studios, stuff like that. Second Baptist had a recording studio because they're a Baptist megachurch. So
that's crazy.
We were able to record our music. We had CDs, that we could manufacture. Because we were in Texas, all of our friends were in college all over Texas, and there's like 100,000 colleges all over. So we could tour. All this stuff was available to us that wouldn't have been available to like any other band, just because, especially not in the early 90s. But all of that was centered, and the point is, around Second Baptist. And so that was really our hub. That's where we hung out. And so that's when I got really steeped in kind of Southern Baptist, kind of culture. And so that's where I became way more familiar with that.
And hold on, at that point, you're like diving 100% in, or are you mostly there for the band, or it's like you're just fully consumed by?
No, I think I was because of Young Life, and like I think it was probably, what was it, the summer after my sophomore year, I think, midway through high school is when I kind of got forced into going to a Young Life camp in Colorado, and had a conversion experience. What I would consider a conversion experience there. Came back like ready to pivot and change my whole life. And from there, it was like Young Life was my whole deal after that. Yeah. And so I was very involved with Young Life starting midway through high school. I wasn't really close to any of that stuff before, but I was very familiar with all of it because I'd grown up in the UMC and so I knew the language, I understood the context, I understood all of it. Had never had what I would consider like a meaningful personal experience with any of it really, until even having gone through confirmation in the Methodist church. But once I connected with Young Life and then had that experience midway through high school, from there it was like every Monday night Young Life Club. Started going with some of my friends to their churches, and I think the other kind of the big popular church in that in that suburb of Houston where I was a big Southern Baptist church. And so I did wind up with because Baptist churches, at least at that time, were way more, I don't want to say even evangelical, but like that seemed to be, it was a much bigger door on a Baptist church than there was a Methodist church. The door was a little narrower on a Methodist church. Like for like a youth group kid, the Baptists are working a little harder on the advertising, and they've got programs and they've got cool you know, rooms with video games in them or something. Methodist Church didn't have any of that, dude. I mean, at least the ones I grew up in. Yeah.
Yeah. It was very revivalistic,
Yeah.
conversion, very
Yeah.
conversion. And that was pretty, and they wanted it to be palatable to the kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
grew up in the same situation. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Well, so the point being that by the time I got to Caedmon's, I was at least 2 or 3 years, let's say, into what I would have considered a very serious Christian experience. Like I absolutely would have, I considered myself absolutely a born again Christian, Jesus follower, studied it. You know, it was a huge part of my life, went to Young Life every Monday, started going with my friends to their churches, you know, and so I was, that was my primary kind of identity narrative at that point. And so when I joined the band, that's where all of us were, you know, at that.
Sorry, let me ask a question because I want to make sure that that I can track the timeline in my head. And maybe this is were y'all making money? You know, like you're 3 years out, you've been doing this, you get together, you obviously didn't make a band to get famous. It sounds like it was a church band. And then just eventually, I'm sure this thing blows up. Where are we relative to when this thing gets kind of really big?
Yeah. Well, we started the band in 92. I was right out of high school.
Okay.
And interestingly, like we weren't we were based out of Second Baptist because that's where Cliff's dad was the pastor, and that's where all of our pooled resources were obviously there at Second Baptist. But we weren't a church band because in the early 90s, like this was before church bands were getting record deals and being put on the radio. Now every band on Christian radio are all church bands. It's all Hillsong and it's all whatever. It's like bands that started as worship bands in churches. We were never a worship band. We didn't play worship music like that. That was never part of our deal. We were trying to be the Indigo guys. Like we were just trying to write like intellectual folk rock that spoke to our experiences. Like a lot of what you might call Christian music, using my air quotes there, is at our experience of it was a lot of it was geared towards younger kids and youth group kids. And that's like Audio Adrenaline and the Newsboys and it's like all these bands that were very focused on youth group kids in high school. And then there's like all this tons of music that was like adult contemporary, more focused on young adults and that kind of music. And it was like, you know, people like, you know, Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith and all those kind of people. Yeah. There's this huge gap, and probably because because it's a business. I mean, it's call it Christian if you want, but it's a business. Yeah. And the word Christian, when applied to anything other than human being, is a marketing term. And so Christian music, like they're trying, you know, they're running a business. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's a lot of money when you're targeting high school kids because their parents have money. When you're targeting young adults because they're new into the workforce, so they have money. There's a giant gap in between, which is basically once you graduate, the whole college experience for 4, 5, or 6 years, there's no music, there's no soundtrack for college age Christians. There was not for us at that time. So that's the gap we were feeling. There was no soundtrack for what we were experiencing as kind of young intellectual thinking, critically thinking Christian kids or whatever. And so that's what we were trying to make. Like that's what we loved, more intellectual type music. We loved, you know, Bob Dylan and the Indigo Girls and Simon and Garfunkel and, you know, like the thinking folk music. And so we were just trying to make the stuff that we were looking for and couldn't find. And so we were a college band. I mean, that's basically what we did. And so we toured all over Texas, all colleges, and then slowly but surely as an indie band started touring outside of Texas, and we started playing, and then eventually got a record deal, you know, with a Warner Brother imprint in Nashville, and you know, probably mid 90s. And that's when, but we had already sold like almost 100,000 indie records as an indie band, which was really unheard of. Like it was really hard. There was no middle class in the music industry at that time because it was before the internet. It was before the tools were all democratized. It was before recording music was affordable. You couldn't distribute music. There was no way to do it. We somehow doggedly figured out a way, kind of created a space for ourselves. And then got a record deal. And then, so it's probably mid 90s when we started, you know, 94, 95, when we signed a record deal. And that's when records were being distributed for us and we were signed and we started touring bigger. And when that started.
I remember finding you guys and like feeling, as a young Christian kid, like I was, I found my dad's like Cat Stevens records and Jim
Oh yeah.
Croce records,
Oh yeah.
and those were that was my music. And then
Oh yeah.
modern guys of Dave Matthews, and trying to find my kind of my groove in Christian music. And when I found Caedmon's, I was like, this sounds like something I can attach on to.
Yeah, cool.
A lot of deep. You could tell there's a lot of deep thought in the lyrics, and was really, talking about theological.
Yeah. Well, and that's what we were like dealing with. And, like it was like we were, and it's relevant to the conversation we're having. I mean, when we all got together, we were all just kind of just out of high school ish and starting college. And that's the time where anybody starts to put a more look at their spirituality through a more intellectual lens. And they start to detach from the presumptions of their parents and their parents' tradition. And that's what we were all doing. But we were like, 6 or 7 friends doing it in very tight proximity while we were traveling around and writing songs. And so it was very intellectual and very theological. And we were like having, like constant conversations, like about all this stuff. And we had friends who were in college and friends who were in seminaries who were, throwing books at us to read. And so we were like, all of us would be sitting around reading through all this stuff and studying theology. First time any of us had really ever gone through that. So my experience then, because I was with these other folks, it was like a very intellectual decade of like, we were like really studying and grappling and having long conversations. And even after our shows, we would hang out for hours and talk to the people who had come, just standing around talking about theology, just because we were so hungry for that.
Seminary. You were kind of going through. Is that where, so I was kind of in the same boat as you. Like, I went to college, got a bachelor's degree in religious studies, and then grew up Southern Baptist, then became Reformed in my college age. And so is that kind of when you became Reformed theology? Was
yeah. I mean, we had like mentors, and like Cliff's brother Ben, who was a bit older than us. He was a real mentor to us, and some other kind of folks who were just a little ahead of us, who were mostly like in seminary. And so what happened is they would tell us, they would like send us their reading lists, the required reading list for their seminary year. Wow. And then we would like, and then what was crazy is like, so as we were touring, we would make all these stops at all these record stores and a lot of Christian bookstores to do these like in-store deals where you go in and you hang out and sign records, I guess, and maybe play a couple songs in a store and like the afternoon before a concert or something. Mm-hmm. And so what was crazy is the store, as like to thank the bands, they would typically say, oh, you can pick out one thing from the store and you could take it as a gift or whatever. And I think most bands, and I think most bands probably grabbed, a CD or something. I remember literally like walking up to the counter with like a big hardback, like Wayne Grudem Systematic Theology, and dropped it. And I was like, this is what I want. Yeah. Like an $85 textbook, like that's what we were grabbing. So the front lounge of our bus was just stacks of, theology textbooks. And that's what we were blowing through. Like we were reading Calvin's Institutes, and we were reading Wayne Grudem, and we were reading.
What year was that? Because it sounds like you were a Calvinist before Calvinism was cool.
Boy.
Well, because
no, I'm with you.
There was a big wave, and I came to that.
Yeah.
The 2009, I guess, was when I came into it. And
interesting. Oh yeah, for us it would have been 95, 94, 95, 96. I mean, because if you go back to those Caedmon's records, like I think it was 40 Acres. I forget what year that record came out, but like, I had a song on that record called Thankful that was it was extremely Calvinistic. I mean, it was very Reformed, and that's what we were studying, and that's where we were all leaning. And so if you go and listen through those tunes, like there is a ton of that all over those songs.
This is probably a side note, but did you ever feel like that theology made you an asshole? Because
absolutely.
Definitely
Kevin was such an asshole when I met
him on that, and really embarrassed at. And I remember going to like T4G and just thinking like, I'm in the biggest crowd of douchebags that I've ever. And I don't mean that like
Yeah.
I know there are well-meaning people in there, but I'm including myself in it, that
Yeah.
it just almost gave us this just lack of care for people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to not throw Calvin completely under the bus,
Yeah.
although there's not a ton I still agree with him on. I think that all of my friends who've gone through seminary and whose spirituality and approach to faith becomes very intellectual and very academic, it tends to make people combative, and it tends to make people more argumentative because because they're defending a position now, and because they're and so to me, yes, like the years that I really heavily studied theology, and especially that more reformed leaning stuff, those were my least loving years by a long shot.
Yeah.
But I think if I had been at Asbury in Kentucky or something, and was studying Wesleyan theology, it probably would have made me just as much of an asshole. It just would have made me a different kind of asshole, like a free will asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the friends who I was debating with at that time, who were on the opposite spectrum of me, were doing the same thing I was doing. It was just the other side of a coin, So I think that that's kind of like a growing pain. I think for young, well, for people who are in a certain stage of faith, who come to that and maybe have the propensity and the interest to go more intellectual with it, and because I have a lot of friends who just never went that way, and for them it's just very much still a mystical, and I love that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, childlike faith, is like to be praised, as they say. And so, but for me and for a lot of my friends, it did get very intellectual, because everything gets intellectual for me. Like that's just how that's the grid through which I'm doing everything, and so I think for people who are like that, there are going to be growing pains where it transitions into something like that, and then you have to kind of reframe it over time and make it, because arguably Christianity it's a mystical first century religion. It's not an intellectual pursuit. It's a very mystical religion. And so it's like, but hardly anybody practices it that way. And so, and I certainly wasn't. I was very like ducks in a row. Ask me a question. It's like dropping the Plinko ball in the systematic theology, and I can take you to precisely what my whatever.
That's what I hated about it.
Yeah.
Couldn't win an argument with Kevin. That's why you were saying, I was like, this is great, because you found yourself an argument with no loopholes and no way out of it. And you can just sit here and.
Well, yeah. And you get, to be honest with you, I think the reason why I was so deep and went so deep in it was I had so many doubts.
Sure.
And so I'm trying to find the answers for myself.
Yep.
And maybe the reason why I was so militant was because I wasn't necessarily arguing against the person. I was arguing against myself.
Sure. I think a lot of what goes wrong in Christianity is obviously fear. It's fear-based.
Yeah, absolutely.
And which interestingly is like, what, isn't that one of the most often, one of the commands you hear most often in the Bible is do not be afraid. It's like, yeah, there's, because even like Christian music, again, like you drive down any highway in the South and there's going to be billboards for Christian radio stations that all say safe for the whole family. I mean, they're literally selling fear. Yeah, I mean, like implicitly what they're selling is fear. Because it's like, this music on our station is safe for the whole family, which implies there's other music that is not safe for your family.
Yeah.
And so whatever's been rubber stamped as Christian is the stuff you want your kids listening to, and nothing else.
I heard.
Whereas, yeah.
I was about to say, I heard a country song the other day. I think it was by John Rich, and it's called Revelation. And it was all about Jesus coming back and like just trying to scare the hell out of you. You know what I mean? And
sure.
And that just thinking, damn, like, that's a perspective. Somebody is buying that song and like think everybody's got to hear this. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, and back to the point, like my feeling about it now is that, and it's no wonder I wound up the way I did during all those years of intense study. Like, I'm not sure that a God that can be categorized and perfectly understood is a God that can save.
Yeah.
I don't I don't think that's the one. I think that the one thing I do still agree with Calvin about is that the hearts of people are like little idol factories. All they do is manufacture things for us to call God. That's all they do 24/7. They never close. And so we have to be really careful when we start worshiping something. We have to be really careful when we find something that we think we need, we should call God and start, because another great quote is, if a God can be killed, it must be killed.
Yeah.
And so I think it's our job. I mean, call it spiritual pursuit, call it, to destroy false gods, identify and destroy false gods. That's the job. And as soon as you find one that you're up against that you can't kill, then maybe that's where you slow down and you start to take a good look, and maybe that's where you bend a knee. I don't know. But what the point being that, like, it's no wonder the God that I was obsessed with, that was a purely intellectual pursuit, that I had perfectly boxed and categorized, and I perfectly understood, was not a God that was in any way changing me to be loving or kind, or none of the fruits of the Spirit were showing up anywhere on me as a result of pursuing and this particular God, which is not a God that could save me. Yeah.
So, all right, I think the next question is, do you start running into feelings like this, while you and Caedmon's I mean, let's say you're releasing, things get released sort of, a year or whatever after you write them. So are you guys like releasing songs that are deeper and deeper into the Calvinistic, I guess, set, as you're also going through having maybe questions about this? Like, what's that like?
Yep. Well, and because I was so young, I mean, I was like right out of high school. I'm kind of grateful for some of that in my early professional life, because what it taught me, and it taught me, there was no way around this lesson, unfortunately for me, but is that I am not preoccupied with feeling like I have something totally dialed in and figured out in order to document it.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of friends who really have big concerns about that. Like, they're not going to write the song, they're not going to write the book until they really feel like they've got the whole thing kind of tied up. And so I kind of it wasn't super. It's not always easy to have in my past, but like, I like that we were learning all that, and we were so excited about it and gung ho about it and certain about it, and the greatest lesson of adult spirituality for me has been to lose my certainty. Like, uncertainty is the best thing I've got going for me now. Because when it comes to things you can't see, like God, things you can't know, like the future, uncertainty is really the best way to go.
Well, the younger you are, the easier it is to just dive right up.
Yeah.
I absolutely.
The
way that you write, because, like, a lot of times when you're raising your kids, you try not to show them the struggle. You only want to show the finished product, and when you're writing, you're showing it all. Like, it's showing the process, you know what I mean?
Yes, and we didn't know, though, that that's what we were doing, because at the time we thought, oh well, this is the truth. God knows, like, this is it forever. Like, this is the objective truth of the universe. So I don't have any problem putting a real fine point on it and being super dogmatic about it. I don't know, because this is it, bro. Like, but then over time, as you realize, okay, and so I'm grateful that I've had like a long career at writing songs, because I've been able to, because here's the deal, like, the job description for a creative person, if you like, is to look at the world and describe it. Look at the world, tell us what you see. That's the job. The great thing about that idea is that it's constantly changing. You, as you observe the world, are constantly changing. The world you're observing is constantly changing. And so you can stand in the same place 5, 10, 20 years later, see a completely different thing, describe it a completely different way, or not imagine that it's all that meaningful and should be described at all, and not even write about that particular thing. It could all change over time. So I'm grateful to have had the chance to have written a ton more songs to go with all those early songs.
Yeah.
And the only way you're really going to get a sense of who I am or what I'm made of is to look at all of it and squint your eyes at it. But if you're doing that job right, and you've done it honestly, vulnerably over time, there's a 100% chance that you are going to disagree with all your previous material, because because over time it's like, because somebody who still believes and agrees with 100% of what they did 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago is a person who isn't healthy. They're not coming into new information. They really can't be trusted.
They're not growing.
So either you're lying to us or you're not evolving or growing in any way.
Do you
and
think,
so
yeah. Go ahead. What were you about to say?
No, that's it.
Do you think that wedding dress, I know obviously that's not where you are now, but do you think that was kind of the start of like that evolution of like towards where you are now? Kind of questioning some of those things?
I think so. It's interesting. Wedding Dress was the song that basically launched my solo career.
Yeah.
I mean, because when I wrote it, I thought it was a Caedmon song.
Yeah.
And I played it for the band and they liked it, but they were very hesitant for me to play it on stage with our band.
Yeah.
And because we had spent 10 years building a thing that we were stewarding as a group. Mm-hmm. And this would have been a very disruptive, like it would have been like throwing a hand grenade into the first floor of it at that time. That wasn't
back almost too, like to anything. Like when I heard that song, it was different from anything I'd ever heard, Christian genre.
Yeah. Well, and so I think for us, it's like they were rightfully protective and I understood that, but I felt strongly about it. So the point is, to skip the whole story is like that kind of propelled me out on my own, which is a trajectory I've been on for 20 some odd years now as a solo artist. But what's interesting about it though, is I feel like Wedding Dress is very theologically conservative. It's actually very reformed in its ideology.
Yeah.
And because you want to talk about total depravity, but the thing is, I pulled it right out of Ezekiel 16. I mean, it's like that wasn't, it's like it's hard language, but it's right there in the Bible, and there's no question about what it's talking about. And I was utilizing it as a communicator. You put a siren on top of a thing. Sometimes it's language like that. And, it's like, profanity. I mean, ask Paul. Profanity is very helpful to put a siren on top of an idea that you don't want people to miss. Paul did it many times in the New Testament. But so for me, I think that song does not feel to me like pulling the thread or lighting the fuse on where I wound up in my, if you like to call, deconstruction, which is not at all a great word, because if you ask 10 people to define a word and you get 10 different definitions back, you should stop using that word immediately. And deconstruction is one of those words. You don't know what you're agreeing to when you use the word deconstruction as a self-prescription. You don't really know what you're agreeing to for people because you don't know what they think it means or what it means. But the point being, shorthand for us today, I feel like that was, if anything, me really digging my heels in to the very conservative theology, but it was me more coming out of my shell with my creative ethic, which is like, I feel strongly that I want to write songs about things that other people avoid, subject matter that people want to completely avoid, do not want to write about, politics, idolatry. I mean, whatever it was that you don't want to be writing songs about, that's all I wanted to write songs about. And I feel like Wedding Dress was me taking a kind of a first kind of step of faith into, I'm going to start writing things that I think are going to get me into trouble, are going to get me knocked off my platform, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So that was a big step that way.
So because I'm trying to connect the dots here, right? So you got Caedmon's, you're writing new music, Derek. You don't think at this time you're going to be a solo artist, or you think you're headed in that direction?
Never imagined it. For 10 years I was in that band. I never wanted to be a solo artist, never imagined being a solo. I got asked constantly about it, and I was like, no, I'd never do that. I loved being in that band. I loved being part of an ensemble. I never wanted to be a solo artist.
So when you present that song to them and they say no, you are upset, or you're not upset because you understand where they're coming from?
Not upset at all. I totally understood it because I knew that song was disruptive, and I knew there was something different about it versus all the other songs I had written for the band. And I knew, but our band was going through transitions at that time anyway. We were at about the 10-year mark, and there were other transitions naturally happening around that time. And so for me, I was like, you know what? Like I felt strongly that I should follow that energy though, that song and where that was, because it's not like once I wrote that song, there were a lot of other songs that were coming around the same time, all of which wound up on my first record. And so, for me, I was like, no, I feel like I trusted the material, and I was like, I need to follow the my creative instincts. And and to me, it felt like a safe transition moment for me, because our band, I mean, that's kind of its own story, but like our band was kind of going through things and struggling with some things and I was feeling less and less connected to it at that time. I felt like my identity wasn't as much with the decisions the band was making at that time and the things that it seemed that the band was valuing based on those decisions. So for me, it felt very natural. Like, okay, I can either go with the band group decision making that's kind of taking them this way, that to me feels like compromising and on some things that I feel are important, or I've got this material that feels very risky and but it feels exciting to me, and it feels like there's a spark to it, and maybe it's going somewhere disruptive. And man, I that's where I feel like I need to go. So it did. So to us, it honestly wasn't. I mean, it wasn't easy because we've been a band for 10 years together, and I didn't want to leave them. I wanted them to succeed, but I remember like looking back on it once we got through the initial impact of one of us leaving. It felt more like a church plant. It felt more like, well, you need to specialize in a thing that we can't do as a group. So you go do that. And, because we worked together on the whole transition. Like we literally put together an album because I'd written half or more than half the band's songs on every album up until the one where like I wrote no songs on it. But we did it together as a group, and we knew it would be the record they would put out around the time I was putting out my first record. And I wanted them to have a ton of new material that I was hardly any part of. A ton of new songs they could play without me. So, we worked on that together. So
that's pretty
it was tough, but we understood it. Yeah.
So, okay. All right. So then we get into the solo stuff. Derek feels, it sounds like, stronger and closer to faith than he's felt maybe even before doing that. But then I know ultimately we end up at some type of deconstruction. So where are we going after that?
I think this is where so this is kind of a strange thing, because I remember listening to Fingers Crossed, and so just to kind of give you a background of me, I had an affair in 2018. This is where me and Tyler met. We were working at the Downtown Rescue Mission. I was a senior director of ministry at the Rescue Mission, and I had an affair with a coworker. It went on for about a year off and on with no one knowing, and then eventually came out. I remember coming to Fingers Crossed before that, not understanding anything at all about your experiences. Afterwards, about 2020, that album felt like it was really a background music to my life. And so was that event kind of what took you into the deconstruction, and what happened during that time that kind of made you question those things?
Yeah. Well, so the way that I've kind of thought about it as I look back on it is, so that would have been 2017 when that record came out.
Yeah.
And like I feel like there are people who have told me over the years that they saw whatever. So let me really quickly, we can continue to use the term deconstruction as our shorthand, but like when I say that word, what I mean is like a perennial audit of my presumptions about invisible reality. That to me, so it's an ongoing thing that should really be part of a spiritual practice.
Part of the routine, challenge it.
Yeah, to me, it's not like a big throw your life away, blow up, turn your back on, burn down a thing. That's not at all what it is.
Detox.
It is part detox, and it's also for evangelical listeners, it's sanctification, if you like.
Yeah.
It's going through and determining what of this rings true, what of this is a mature expression of spirituality for me. And so anyways, I had a lot of friends and people who told me that they, looking back in hindsight, that I knew way back when you put out your first solo record. I knew when I heard Wedding Dress. I knew when I heard the Mockingbird record. I knew when all your political stuff. I knew when I heard that that was where you were going, and you were all deconstructing, and you were, and I was like, well, that's crazy, because I don't remember ever feeling Like if the last song on my first record on She Must Shall Go Free is a song called The Church. And it literally, the chorus of it is, if you love me, you'll love the church. It was like, I wasn't looking to pull a thing down or burn a thing down or deconstruct a thing. I was fighting with and for a thing that I loved and deeply identified with. It was turning tables over in my own living room. I mean, that's what I felt like ethically, creatively, I was doing for almost my whole solo career up till Fingers Crossed, is like that was the job. And that's how I approached it. But I identified squarely with the targets of my criticism. I mean, I was in my own crosshairs primarily. I was primarily writing about myself when I was criticizing, when I would use critical language about the church. It's because I loved it and because I wanted it. It's the same way I hate to identify myself with Martin Luther, because he's such a complicated character, but he didn't start off as a reformer. He started off as a Protestant. Like he went in, he was a Catholic. He went in to try to make his own tradition better because he saw things that were happening that were awful, buying their loved ones way out of purgatory. And it was just a giant empire building exercise. And he knew that was contrary to the faith that he understood. And so he nailed up his theses to say, hey, come on, we got to do better. We got to do better. Yeah. And then he wound up being a Protestant and then eventually reformer because he wound up on the other side of it. I mean, I never imagined leaving or not identifying with that community. I didn't see any of that coming, but a lot of people told me that because again, the thing we talked about a minute ago, like my creative ethic of loving and feeling very comfortable in a disruptive role. Like that's where I'm wired. So I don't ever have problems writing songs that no one else is willing to write. I'm cool with that.
Must be nice.
But I think a lot of it's like, that whatever that thing, that people pleasing gene is, I have other problems, but I don't have that. And so I don't have any problem writing songs like that. But the point is, I think people read that on me like he's pulling the threads and he's deconstructing, and he's not. That's not at all what it was for me.
Like it was putting the black spot on yourself. If you're like, I just think about the churches that I've been. It's like any type of, that's like just putting putting the black spot on your hand and just showing it to everybody and saying, hey, I'm really questioning this stuff. I mean, how often do they want to hear that at all?
So what? Yeah. So if that. So when did it start? When did it?
Yeah. Let me get there for you. And so, it's great but it's like, just as a wrap up for that, like, I feel like, be it if somebody is a pastor, if somebody is a teacher inside of a church situation, definitely artists. I mean, there is a prophetic element that you can embrace, or a role that you can and maybe sometimes should play that does get you into trouble. Yeah. It does not mean you're not part of a community. It doesn't mean you're trying to burn the thing down. It often means you're really trying to help. Yeah. And so that's the way I understood everything I did up till Fingers Crossed. Now, when I went through, like 2014, 2013, 2014, when I started going through some major personal, devastating stuff, it was really a hard few years. And I wasn't making music during those years. I took a real break, like years of not writing and not putting records out and not doing anything. Because I didn't know how to describe the world that I was seeing at that time. And I didn't know how to do my job really. And so it took me a while to get my bearings and my footing. But I think the thing that lit the fuse on the deconstruction, if you like, is that, this is the way that I have found to say it that I think is the most helpful, is that when you're in a boat, you are not incentivized to examine the safety, the veracity, the strength of that boat while you're in it. Yeah. To decide if that boat can hold you and is strong enough to bear the waves that you're up against. You're in no way incentivized to ask those questions while you're in that boat. You have to presume it can hold you while you're literally depending on it for your life. Absolutely. And so oftentimes the only time you can really take an honest look at that boat that you're in, the thing that's protecting you from the waves, the thing that you're depending on to keep you safe from the big destruction, is when you're thrown, you're thrown from it. And so I was thrown from the boat. Yeah. And it gave me, although that was a devastating, time personally, it gave me the opportunity to have a look at the boat.
Did people kind of shut you out at that time? Like, was there
some people,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And I would never say that. I would never judge anybody's reasons for leaving a faith community or changing their opinions about spirituality or religion or whatever that But for me, I don't think I think Christians failing to practice Christianity well is not a great reason to leave.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
that's not necessarily Christianity's fault. That's not necessarily Jesus or God's fault that people love you poorly. And so, like if anything, it's a group of confessed sinners, and so of course they're going to love you poorly.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was some of that. I don't think that was any part of why I made any changes in my, but the point being that, I think that what I learned during that time was, it's like, so much gets called into question, and you start to question so much about who you are. You learn, if you're trying to be healthy about it, and I was, and you jump into really intensive good therapy, which I did for like a lot of years. You learn everything you can. You start to name things and learn about things and be able to talk about things. And I think that it's, as I was digging everything else up and digging up the dirt to see what the roots looked like as a result of the fruit that I was seeing, it's like, okay, well, maybe, I planted some of the wrong things under the ground because this fruit doesn't look good to me. And so like, I want to figure out what's going on and plant better seeds so I can see better fruit. And in that process, it did pull in my spirituality, and it did pull in my experience of faith. And so at that time, and so that was the examination of the boat. And some people determine, oh, like, I thought I was in a boat, but that's like, I'm floating on a 2x4. There's no, I can't believe that that's what I've been in for the last 20 years. Sometimes you realize, you know what? Like, maybe I don't even need a boat. What's wrong with the water? Like, who sold me the boat? Talk about like, talk about like the selling fear. For me, it's like, I'm not even, who told me I needed a boat? There's nothing wrong with the water. Like, so if you want to get into that metaphor, like, I don't feel like the boat is necessary. And so for me at that time, everything else came crashing down. And so I was like, you know what, let's just throw that into the big mortgage. I'm not even going to notice, let's really pull it all down and look at all of it. And spirituality included. And it's like, for me, I remember thinking, okay, if aliens came to Earth and just to observe us and to figure out, how did all this happen? How did it all start? How did it all get the way it is? You wonder how long it would take them to get to the point where they were like, oh, okay. And then the God who made all things, who is, three in person and one in essence, came down as his own son to die on behalf of the sins, because these people, and then if you believe in it, it's like, at what point would the aliens have put all that together? Another way of saying it is, and it's a kind of a Ricky Gervais quote, is like, if you were to take all of the books of religion and spirituality and destroy all of them right now, and take all the books of science and destroy all of them as well, in 1,000 years, all of the science books and all those facts would be back, because all those tests would be done and they would be the same conclusions, and all the gravity and everything else, all the facts of all the science books would be back.
Wow.
All those books of religion and spirituality, it would all be different. Arguably, none of it would come back the same way if you destroyed all of it and hit reset. So for me, it was, so I was like, I'm going to hit reset. And from here, I'm going to decide what feels, what rings true to me. And I hesitate when I say the word feels, because I think a lot of people, when you go through what we're calling deconstruction, they're like, oh, you're just doing whatever you think feels right. Now, here's the deal. Nobody comes to any belief or fact or experience any other way than by way of their faculties. There is no way to dig a tunnel under your feelings. And so even your experience of Christianity are your feelings and your opinions about the Bible and about spirituality. You don't have some special mainline tunnel dug under all of your emotion and faculties and what you can see and smell and taste and hear and feel. That you are coming to your conclusions exactly the same way that I am coming to mine. So I don't want, I hate when people are like, oh, you're just doing it this way because you don't want to be bound to the objective truth of this and that. I'm like, no. Your opinions of objective truth, you're coming to through the same faculties and feelings that I'm coming to these. It just does not ring true to me. It doesn't feel necessary. So I've just had a different experience of it now.
I don't think we allow each other to wrestle anymore. It's like, a lot of times people will attack when maybe we say something different from what someone else is saying. And it's like, let people wrestle. One thing that I wrestled with through that time, really for me, and I'm not really through a deconstruction. I actually went in an opposite way, which is unique. So I was Reformed Baptist, and now I'm Catholic, which is
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. No, I love it.
Yeah, so we kind of went.
I mean, if that's what you found and what rings
Yeah,
true and
exactly.
what brings you comfort, and here's the other thing, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to. It's important as I'm thinking about. I want to have said it is like the thing that for me matters when it comes to any of this, when it comes to anybody's opinions about invisible reality, anybody's opinions about spirituality or faith or whatever it is, and that's all that. I just want to be clear. Whatever your thoughts, whatever your beliefs are, those are your opinions. They're your opinions. That's all they are, and mine are my opinions.
Yeah.
But if what you're believing about spirituality is making you more kind, if it's making you, if the result of it is being demonstrated by what we could call the fruits of the Spirit, patience and kindness and long suffering, and it's like if it's making you more radically welcoming to people, if it's making you kind and loving and compassionate, I want to hear all about it, and I'm interested, and I want to hear if it's making you more combative and argumentative and bigoted and racist and homophobic. You know what? I'm not interested. I don't want to hear about it because the thing is, like, just like James said, I see the fruit on the tree. I see the fruit on the tree. I know what's buried under the ground. You can claim whatever you want, but I see the fruit. You can't hide it. So I see it. Yeah. And based on the fruit that I'm seeing, that tells me everything. You're unintentionally confessing everything to me with the fruit that you're clearly demonstrating. That tells me everything I need to know. And your own Bible gives me that as a way by which to look at that evidence. And so, like with so if the result is kindness, and the kind of radical welcome that Jesus demonstrated in the way that he loved people, and he loved marginalized and complicated people to such an extent that it ruined his reputation. If that's what your belief and whatever you're believing is causing you to do, I want to hear all about it.
Absolutely.
I want to hear all about it.
I'm the same.
If not, I'm not interested.
I think that's what drew me to it, honestly. And of course, this isn't about me becoming Catholic, but
no, I'm interested though. Yeah.
We, when I started studying the lives of the saints, and just most of them were poor, most of them were not famous. Most of them went through a lot of suffering, and just saw what you're talking about is seeing just the love and the patience and the kindness and the goodness that was all around them. And I was like, well, what is this? You know what I mean?
I agree.
It wasn't that I told Tyler this quote today. It said, I was asking him, I said, do you ever wonder that Reformed theology feels like bad health insurance? Like you kept it for a long time when you didn't need it, and when you needed it, it didn't work very well. That's the way I feel sometimes. Is it's like, grace, grace, grace. It's all about grace. It's all about faith, and then all of a sudden, like I made, the biggest mistake of my life. And that, not necessarily the people, but that theology didn't really work anymore. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like, wow, okay.
It didn't scale to your need.
No, not at all. It didn't meet me there at all. And so for at least me, I was in a period of darkness for about 5 years where it got really dark. And to be honest with you, the only thing that I ever felt like really scratched my reality was was listening to things like Fingers Crossed and hearing, like, don't meet me in a bar unless, don't pray for me unless where you're going to pray for us both. And like, I was having those interactions and, saying, I don't know, goodbye for now. Where, I don't know if it's that I'm not chosen or you're not real, but either way, I'm heartbroken. Dude, those lyrics resonated so, because I remember thinking, I don't feel God. I don't feel like I'm part of this. And so there's either two realities. Either you're not real or I'm just not yours.
How do you get back? How do you get to where you are today then? So you're like super hard Calvinist, and then, there's an event for you and it kind of, I guess we've been using deconstruct, but now you're Catholic. So then you go into a point where you're like, okay, hold on. There's got to be some of this that, like, what's that?
Well, for me, it was exactly what Derek is talking about. It was fruit. It was what is producing, what is going to produce this fruit in my life? And it stopped being about being right or wrong, and it started being about what is going to produce love in me, what's going to produce patience, what is going, what's going to be, and I hate even using the word tolerance, but what is going to be accepting? You know what I mean? Like just loving. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do. I just love you. And that's where, for me, that's why I was drawn to the faith, was just because that's what I saw in Mother Teresa. And and so that's what drew me. Is like, you know what? I just want to be about love.
Yeah.
You know,
Derek, would you call Fingers Crossed a Christian album? They sell it as a Christian album?
Did they? That's a good question.
Yeah. Oh no, I definitely would, but I have like such a practical reason. I mean, as I said before, like the word Christian, when applied to stuff other than people, is a marketing term,
Yeah.
and that's what it is. And so Christian music, I mean, it's a rubber stamp. I mean, it's like it's a thing it's a box you check in TuneCore when you're uploading your music to be distributed to Spotify. I mean, it is. It's like there's no moral guardrail of somebody deciding what the Christian stuff is. It's not, and Christian music, so to speak, cannot mean what it means when you're talking about a person. Arguably, it's not the right, true, good, beautiful, redeemed, saved music. It's not the only music we'll be listening to in heaven is not the stuff on your local Christian radio station. It's not the like redeemed stuff. So the point being, like, in my opinion, Christian music is music that Christians are the primary audience for. And so for me, when I wrote Fingers Crossed, and even my most recent record is called The Jesus Hypothesis, and like that record, I feel like is if it's for anybody, if I've got to categorize it some way or the other, it's maybe a folk record, but it's like a Christian record because it's for Christians. That's who it's for. There's a song called Sympathy for Paul on it that's about the Apostle Paul. If you who is this for but for Christians? It's like if you don't have some background or knowledge of the language of evangelical Christianity, you're not going to know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the only the people most likely to understand or be impacted in any way by the music that by these records, and not every record I make I would categorize this way, but I think Fingers Crossed is absolutely a Christian record. I think Jesus Hypothesis is absolutely a Christian record because it's for Christians.
Yeah.
I mean, that's who I would hope would listen to it and I think would understand it and might be able to get something out of it. Any other random person would be like, what is he what are we talking
Paul?
about? Like, what is, I mean, honestly,
why is he killing us? You know what I mean? Why?
Exactly. What's with this guy?
Well, Derek, do you land or don't let me skip too far if you want to talk about something else? But I mean, are you like Kevin, where you sort of eventually land on what you consider to be some sort of stable ground in faith, or I mean, are you just still? I mean, Jesus Hypothesis. Are we unpacking like where you've landed today so far? Like, just where?
I think that where I've gotten to is that I don't feel like the term belief has done me a ton of favors. I don't think it does people a lot of favors mainly because I think when you shift into, when it comes again to invisible things like God, unknowable things like the future, I think uncertainty is an important element. And I think when you shift from that kind of exploratory kind of learning and figuring a thing out and really looking critically, but not having any flag in the ground, I think that's a very different posture than suddenly flag planted, defend the castle. Now I'm believing a thing. Yeah. It's like, I don't know that when it comes to things that I can't see and can't know,
right,
like God in the future, I don't know that I don't know that belief is a great approach. And because again, there's just it comes with a lot of problems. It comes with a lot of lazy thinking. It comes with a lot of confirmation bias, where once you're believing a thing, you're looking at everything to confirm the thing that you're saying you're believing. And so for me, it's like the reason the record's called The Jesus Hypothesis is because I wanted to basically, the place that I had gone with an axe to just chop everything down, I wanted to go back into that place with a scalpel and say, I want to be careful. And I want to say a lot of this is good. And I don't want to be blind to good, ethical true things that just happen to be in the season just behind me that I am deconstructing out of. I think there's a lot of that that's very good, and that I don't want to be just stubbornly refusing to bring any parts of my evangelical Christianity with me into wherever I'm going spiritually in the future, just because it happens to be part of something that I'm leaving behind. I don't want to be identified with what's behind me. I want to move forward. And so for me, hypothesizing in real time is a better, and that's kind of goes back to that. Deconstruction for me is a perennial audit of my presumptions about invisible reality and spirituality. I need to be doing it constantly. So rather than believing a thing and saying, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and make a big assumption that this is the true thing, and I'm just going to go ahead and lean my weight over that way and identify myself that way. I don't want to do that. I want to say, I'm going to hypothesize in real time. And because the great thing about hypothesizing is, as long as it continues to ring true and it continues to, then you keep going with it and you keep believing it and you continue to. So for me, I could go the rest of my life this way. And so I am unshakably uncertain. And I will remain uncertain about things I can't know. And I think that feels healthy to me,
That's really, I mean, if you look at Thomas, if you look at Nathaniel when he comes to Christ, I mean, there are a bunch of guys that are like, I don't know if John the Baptist. And what's really odd is, like, the Christian church, like when we look at those guys, it seems, we make them these heroes of the faith. But then when we see it in real time, we're like, I don't know about that guy. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, dead men make very convenient heroes.
Exactly.
And but the thing is, like, uncertainty is not the enemy of faith. It's the prerequisite of faith, actually.
That's a great
so
point.
For me, the thing that I came around to is, like, I hate a category. Hate it. Categories never did any good for me. It tries to give a short answer to a question for which there's no short answer. That's why I hate all the years that I called myself a Calvinist or whatever, because I don't know what I'm agreeing to. It's like we talked about before. But the thing I have resonated with agnosticism, because atheism is about belief. Agnosticism is about knowledge. And what I'm saying is, I don't think I can know, and I don't think anyone can know. And that's the whole point of having faith, is you can't know. So you have faith in a thing. So I think anybody, when it comes to spirituality, anybody is an agnostic something. I think it feels healthy to me. I'm always going to say, even if I come back to some version of Christianity, I will be an agnostic Christian, because I need to be clear that I cannot know. I'm not claiming to know. I don't ever think I'm supposed to know, but I have a faith in a thing, maybe. But agnosticism, in terms of what you can and can't know, I think is important.
Yeah,
honestly.
I think we need voices like yours in the community, definitely, because it challenges us. I mean, you really challenge us to think kind of outside the box of the norm, and that's important.
It's not like you can walk into Sunday school at the church that I am a member of and say what Derek just said without getting, like, booed out of the room.
Oh, without,
like with the way that you're describing it, Derek, I mean, it's really cool to hear. It's actually pretty refreshing. I feel good about it. You know what I mean? But at the same time, not that maybe you've tried to get into a church or go to church or something like that, but, like, that's got to the relationship. Anytime you try and go into where do you find community now in faith, Derek? Because how could you do that in a regular church?
Yeah. Well, it's not a thing I feel like, oh, there's my dog. It's not a thing that I feel a deficit of, where I feel like I need to go. Like, I do it organically, like I do everything else. And I talk to my friends who I have, and we talk about our different, because I'm not trying to align with or gather with people who agree with me about my faith experience. And so I just want to be around people who I think are kind and loving, and I want to hear all about their lives, spiritual and otherwise. And I want to learn everything I can from them, and I want to be around them and that energy. But I don't I don't have any kind of preoccupation with being part of any kind of a gathering. I never kind of did. Once I came out of evangelicalism, I was never like, ooh, I need to find, like, something to take the place of that church gathering experience. I just hang out with my friends, and if I have gratitude I go directly to the source, the literal source. And so I go to my wife often and express my gratitude to her rather than going to God and telling him and not telling my wife, which happens in a lot of Christian marriages. And so it's like, I go directly to the source and I communicate directly with my friends. Yeah. And if that's as far as it goes, then that's plenty.
Dude, that's pretty heavy. What you just said. I mean, that's and
you can practice Christian spirituality that way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can do both. You can be grateful to the God that you believe made all that stuff and provided.
What I was getting at was that that is that's something that we should think about. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, I mean, it's still got me think. I'm like staring over here. I'm thinking, do I need to tell my wife, hey, I was telling God that I think you're really cool and that I'm like super happy that you're in my life.
Just make sure you're doing both. If you have a strong instinct, if you're thanking God for something, also think about what the literal source or cause of that gratitude is and go tell that too. Go say it to those people too.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful because, they're not like in your prayer life, you know what I mean? And so they don't really know. And
which is also to say that it's not to say that I don't have what I would consider some version of a prayer life. Like I absolutely, in moments of desperation or moments of fear or even moments of gratitude, I absolutely hold and sit with and meditate on and even sometimes speak out those words of gratitude or fear or call for help it feels very integrated into it. It feels like it belongs with everything else. And because like there's a song on my newest record that's called Some Gods Deserve Atheists. And it's basically me saying, I think maybe the God who I deconstructed or the God who I left or the God to whom I am now an atheist or an agnostic I don't think was like the God of the universe. I think it's it's demonstrable that it was a God who I made up of some stuff I read in the Bible and some other stuff I read in a theology textbook and some other stuff that I just kind of that felt right to me. The point is, sometimes you have to crucify a false God to hold space for a real God to come and occupy. And so it's like, for me, like oh, hi, here's my cat now. But the point being that, like, I think that's that's an important practice for me. And I think that sometimes people have to realize, like, this isn't you giving up on everything and all your spirituality and your community and losing. Sometimes it's just you being upfront with yourself about, I think there's some of this that isn't real. I think maybe this is like not a real God who this is a version of something that I made up and I need to destroy that. Because
what's crazy when you were saying that, I was thinking, some gods deserve, or some saviors deserve a cross. Like in some contexts, there was a group of people that thought that God was killing Jesus for a good reason. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you think like, that is a crazy thing to think, like somebody's concept of God crucified Christ. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And maybe there is there's a lot of gods that deserve atheists.
That's crazy. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this like 3 or 4 times because some of the stuff you said, Derek, is like, I'm going to have to like really sit with it because I almost feel like the older I get, the more non-committal I get. And the more I go toward kind of like, how would I say it? Like the higher power of it all. Like I do feel like I have a prayer life, meditation. I'm not always active in the church, although I do have young children and we're trying to get into the community of church. But I don't know how, Derek, if I brought my daughter with me to Kevin's house. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to say a word on the way home.
Like this podcast turned into a Catholic, a Methodist, and an agnostic walked into a bar.
Yeah.
Which was so refreshing. I felt.
Well, the thing is, like, a lot, again, like we were saying, like, it's the difference in belief, and for me, kind of hypothesizing in real time about spiritual things. It's like it keeps you on your toes and it keeps you on the edge of your seat, and it keeps you actively critically thinking about all of it, as opposed to, I've made some choices about some ideas, and now I don't think about those. They're non-negotiable. Now I just move forward dealing with the consequences of believing those things, but I don't go back and think about them anymore. I don't think that's a safe way to do spirituality.
Yeah.
And I don't even think the Bible would tell us to do this, to do spirituality that way.
Yeah.
It's an active practice. And if you're no longer critically thinking about, or if there are things for you that are off limits about, if you're not able to go and dig up and examine the roots every so often to see even what's down there, then there's a good chance you're going to have to go through a big explosive deconstruction period, maybe just to destroy the false god you've made in order to find the real one. I mean, so why not make that a healthy perennial practice?
Yeah.
Rather than, and even if it has you coming to the same conclusions year after year, that's fine.
Absolutely.
That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But just be critically thinking about it always, and make sure that you are not giving any allegiance or worship or belief to something that's not a real God, something that you've come up with, something that your local church community came up with, that votes a certain way or believes a certain way or judges or hates a certain group of people. Like, you can be critical about, you can think critically about these things. And I think you should. The stakes are too high not to. So.
Oh, that's good stuff. Well, Derek, man, we want to be respectful of your time. We appreciate you coming on today with us.
Oh yeah, it's been a pleasure.
I think that there's a lot to think about. We'll probably unpack this for a while. Just
Derek's like, now that guy Tyler won't stop emailing me about that thing I said on the podcast.
Well, let's have a follow up. Let's talk again.
Oh, we would absolutely love to. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, would love it.
Yeah, I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like there's a lot that we can learn. So,
me too. Yeah. I mean, I love talking about that. I mean, I'll never stop thinking about or caring about or talking about this stuff.
Absolutely.
You know,
we'd love to, man. At some point, it gets you a show either he's from Huntsville, I'm from Birmingham, and we'd love to have you down here.
Would love it.
Yeah,
would love it. I mean,
I like going to Nashville.
Oh, I do too. Nashville.
You know what? I've lived in Nashville for 20 some odd years, and I can count on maybe one or two hands the times I've ever played shows in this town.
Oh, really?
I don't ever.
They're always out.
Yeah, because everybody lives. It's like Nashville's a hard hometown for an artist because everybody lives here, so nobody can claim it. Like Nashville belongs to nobody.
Yeah.
So Houston was a great hometown for Caedmons, but Nashville is a terrible hometown for an artist. But the point being, it's actually like all I do nowadays. Like literally all I do is play house shows, and they're not all hosted in houses. Some are actually in churches will host it, or it'll be hosted in a coffee shop or a yoga studio. It's like it's all very unconventional. If you go to my website, you can submit your info in a Google form, and I'll come play anywhere. I'll come play in your house. I'll come play. So I'd love to come and play a show in town for you guys. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
Let's do it.
I think it's been really cool getting to know a little bit about you, man. And I'll just leave it at that because I'm hoping this isn't.
Yeah, I hope we get to know more.
So, now let's do it again. I would love it. It's great to talk to you guys.
Cool. Well, thanks, man. I guess we'll call it a wrap, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Part one.
Sign up. What do we do?
What do I do with my hands?
Yeah.
Hit the stop recording button. That's the first step. All right, Derek, man. I've actually.